March 28, 1943. Mid-afternoon, 14,000 feet above the Solomon Islands. The sky is a harsh, brilliant blue, so bright that even tinted goggles can't fully cut the glare bouncing off the scattered cloud tops. The air vibrates with engine noise, a deep, rolling snarl that seems too heavy for a single-engine fighter. But the men hearing it for the first time, the Japanese pilots of the 204th Air Group, don't hide their amusement. Below them, an Allied formation moves toward the Russell Islands, a mix of SBD Dauntlesses and TBF Avengers. Easy prey. The Zero pilots have done this dance 100 times. The Americans rarely send anything fast enough to threaten a high-altitude sweep. The P-40s? Too slow. The Wildcats? Laughably sluggish. Captain Yasuo Ishii, leading today's roving patrol, glances at his wingman and smirks inside his oxygen mask. "Look at that shape," he mutters over the radio as a dark-winged aircraft begins climbing up from the Allied escort group. Bulky, clumsy, an iron barrel with wings. The newcomer climbs steadily, nose pointed slightly upward, engine note rising in a deep harmonic whine. Its silhouette is unlike anything the Japanese have seen over the Central Solomons. A massive engine, long fuselage, and wings shaped like inverted gulls. To Ishii, it looks absurdly overweight. Something that should struggle to turn, struggle to climb, struggle to even stay in formation with the lighter American fighters. But to the U.S. Marine pilot strapped inside that cockpit, it is something else entirely. First Lieutenant Thomas Hawk Delaney runs a gloved hand along the Corsair's throttle quadrant and pushes it forward. The engine roars in response, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 delivering raw force straight into the propeller. Delaney feels the aircraft surge, almost leap, toward the distant Japanese formation. The radio crackles. "Hawk, they're heading for the dive bombers. We don't have altitude." Delaney doesn't answer. He simply breathes, settles deeper into the seat, and lets the Corsair climb. The big fighter should feel heavy. It should feel slow. But it doesn't. Not to him. Not with 2,000 horsepower in front and a design that, despite its looks, slices through the air with predatory intent. Up ahead, Ishii watches, amused. "That thing is actually trying to intercept us," he says. "Let it come. We'll turn inside it before it even reaches firing range." The Zero pilots reposition lazily, already imagining the kill. For months, rumor had circulated among them that America was testing a new fighter. Some huge, ungainly monster intended for carrier decks. The idea had been dismissed immediately. A fighter that large couldn't possibly outturn a Zero, couldn't possibly climb with a Zero, and certainly couldn't dive with the light Mitsubishi. But now, it was here. Below the Japanese formation, Delaney pulls the Corsair's nose upward again. He feels the vibration of the airframe, the clean tension as the aircraft responds without hesitation. 6,000 feet, 7,000, 8,000. The Zero pilots realize something with a faint ripple of confusion. The bulky American fighter is climbing far faster than anything they've fought before. Ishii squints. Impossible. The Corsair keeps rising, inching toward their altitude, the distance closing far too quickly for comfort. Delaney wipes sweat from his brow. The cramped, hot cockpit smells of oil, metal, and cordite from the .50 caliber machine guns sitting just ahead in the wings. His heart pounds. He knows he's outnumbered. He knows the Zeros will try to drag him into a turning fight. But he also knows something they don't. This airplane is built to strike first, and built to strike fast. The moment he reaches 12,000 feet, the tone in his radio changes. "Hawk, bandits breaking left toward the bombers. You're closest." Delaney locks eyes on the lead Zero. No hesitation. He pushes the nose over. The Corsair drops. Not sluggishly, not clumsily, but like a hammer falling from the sky. The Japanese pilots stop laughing. As the distance evaporates, Ishii realizes the horrible mistake. The Iron Barrel is moving faster than any American fighter he has ever seen, faster than their Zeros can break away. The hunt has flipped in an instant. The Corsair is coming for them. The sky seems to tighten around the Japanese formation as the Corsair plunges toward them. What looked bulky from a distance now looks terrifyingly streamlined in its attack. Ishii yanks his control stick back, trying to roll away, but the sudden dive speed of the American fighter is far beyond anything he expected. Delaney feels the G-force press him hard into his seat as the Corsair becomes a dark spear cutting down through the sunlit air. The Zero's silver wings flare beneath him, suddenly rushed into perfect view through his gun sight. He doesn't fire yet. He waits, just another heartbeat, until the shape fills the circular reticle. Then he squeezes the trigger. The Corsair's 650 caliber Brownings erupt with a thunderclap, and bright streaks of tracers slash forward. The Zeros were used to the slow, chattering fire from Allied fighters. But this is something else entirely. An avalanche of lead erupting from a machine moving far too fast to counter. Ishii sees the streaks of fire rip past his canopy and rolls harder. Delaney walks the tracers up the Zero's fuselage. Sparks jump from the engine cowling, then a burst of flame blooms from beneath the Japanese plane's nose. The Zero spins away in a spiral of black smoke. But there's no time to watch it fall. More Zeros are coming. 3 of them peel off from the formation, diving toward Delaney with the confidence of pilots who have outturned every American fighter they've ever met. "He's only one aircraft," one Japanese pilot shouts over the radio. "Spread and circle. Force. Him into a turn." They fan out, expecting the easy kill. Delaney sees them. 3 white and green streaks arcing in from different angles. Instinct tells him to turn and meet them. But instinct is wrong. He knows their tactic. He knows exactly what they want. So instead of turning, he throws the Corsair into a shallow climb. It's a decision no Zero pilot expects. The Japanese fighters try to match it. But as they pull up, they feel something rare. The sensation of being outclimbed. The Corsair simply lifts away from them, its engine thundering like some mechanical beast unleashed into the sky. Second Lieutenant Masato Okada, flying on the right flank, gasps as he watches the American aircraft pulling upward, still accelerating. That's impossible. It's too heavy to climb like that. The Corsair levels off above them, and for a moment, it hangs there almost casually, like a predator choosing which prey to strike next. Delaney rolls left, points his nose down, and commits. He dives again, hard. This time he targets Okada. The Japanese pilot attempts to snap into a vertical roll to evade, but as he banks upward, the Zero's airframe groans, pushing the limits of its lightweight design. The Corsair, by contrast, seems carved from stronger metal. Its wings don't waver. Its dive gains speed so fast that Okada finds the sky rushing past him in a blur. Delaney's guns roar once more. Rounds tear through the Zero's wing and canopy. Okada's aircraft cartwheels downward, trailing flames. The remaining 2 Zeros regroup, shaken. Below, the American bombers continue their steady flight toward the Russell Islands. The escorts, Wildcats and P-40s, are now climbing desperately to join the fight. But Delaney remains the highest, fastest machine in the sky. The Japanese pilots finally understand the truth. This new American fighter isn't slow. It isn't clumsy. It isn't outmatched. It's rewriting the rules of their aerial war. One of the surviving Zeros radios to Ishii, voice tight with fear. That blue-nosed aircraft. It dives like a demon. What is it? Ishii doesn't answer. He's too busy scanning the sky, desperately trying to locate the enemy. Every tactical instinct he has relied on, the lightness of the Zero, the superiority in turning fights, the comfort of altitude, has collapsed in 10 seconds. He finally spots the Corsair. It's climbing again, coming back for another pass. And this time, it isn't alone. Two more dark-winged Corsairs rise from the clouds below, engines howling as they streak upward to join Delaney. The laughter that filled Japanese cockpits earlier is gone, replaced by something they have never felt in the Solomons, not from an American fighter. Fear. Ishii steadies his breathing, trying to force clarity back into his thoughts. 3 Corsairs now. 3 hulking dark blue shapes rising toward him like armored predators. He had assumed the first one was an anomaly, perhaps a reckless American pilot pushing an underpowered prototype beyond its limits. But as the newcomers close the altitude gap with frightening ease, that assumption disintegrates. Below, the sunlight flashes along the Corsair's glossy wings as they pull into formation behind Delaney. Their silhouettes cut clean lines across the afternoon sky, sleek, powerful, and nothing like the lumbering beasts the Japanese had mocked hours earlier on the ground. The radio chatter among the Zeros devolves into panic. They're climbing faster than we can. Break away! Dive! Dive now! But diving isn't the refuge it used to be. The Corsair's immense engines turn the tables yet again. Diving away from American fighters' once guaranteed escape. Against the Hellcats and Wildcats, the lightweight Zero always regained distance in a plunge. Not today. Not with these machines. Ishii makes his decision. All aircraft, full throttle, defensive dive. Head south toward Vella La Vella. He pushes the stick forward. Gravity pulls him down like a stone. The Zero begins its familiar shriek as the airflow stiffens the controls. The lightweight frame shudders on the edge of structural strain. But Ishii knows the aircraft's limits intimately. What he doesn't know, what he never imagined, is that something heavier could dive faster. Above him, Delaney sees the Zeros break downward and smiles grimly. Trying to outrun us? Not today. He angles the Corsair's nose into the dive, and the aircraft immediately becomes a cannonball of metal and fury. The airframe vibrates violently, not from strain, but from raw speed tearing past its riveted skin. The big propeller at the front becomes a blur, pulling the fighter into a velocity the Zeros simply cannot match. The 2 Marine Corsairs to his right and left follow him down, engines screaming. Inside his cockpit, Ishii feels something he has never felt in combat. Helplessness. The Zero was designed for agility, for outmaneuvering opponents through elegant motion. But fighting the Corsair feels like fighting gravity itself. Impossible to outturn, impossible to outclimb, impossible now even to outdive. He checks his rearview mirror. The 3 Corsairs are gaining, fast. They're still behind us, a Japanese pilot cries. How can something that heavy dive like that? Delaney sees the trailing Zero drift slightly out of formation, struggling to keep control at the extreme speed. He adjusts his aim and begins closing the gap. His fingers settle on the trigger, but he waits, just a moment, letting the distance narrow. His squadron mates do the same, descending in a deadly stacked formation that resembles a predatory pack hunt. Wind howls around the cockpit. The ocean below draws closer, churning blue and white. Finally, range. Delaney fires. The tracers rip downward in bright chains. They slice across the Zero's tail and wings, shredding fabric and puncturing structure. The Japanese fighter jolts, tips, then tumbles violently out of control, spiraling toward the sea, with smoke trailing behind it like a dying comet. The remaining Zeros flare out of the dive, pulling back up to avoid slamming into the water. Their formation is broken, their advantage destroyed. The Americans level out just above the waves, engines roaring, the salty spray glinting beneath their wings. They remain on the Japanese fighters like shadows, unyielding, relentless. Ishii's headset erupts with frantic voices. "Leader, they won't disengage. They're climbing with us. They're staying on us." The Corsairs lift their noses, climbing effortlessly above the waterline in pursuit. This is the moment Japanese pilots had dreaded without even knowing it. The realization that the Americans now possess a fighter that excels in every realm the Zero once dominated. Speed, climb, dive, firepower, survivability. The balance in the Solomons has shifted in a single afternoon. Ishii flicks his gaze across his instrument panel, then up at the sky filled with dark blue wings. The bitter truth forms in his mind with cold finality. The age of the Zero is ending, and the age of the Corsair is beginning. The sky above the sea churns with tangled contrails and the lingering smoke of burning aircraft. What began as a confident Japanese sweep has devolved into chaos. A running fight where every advantage the Zero once held has evaporated in the Corsair's shadow. Ishii pulls back on the stick, angling his fighter toward a towering column of clouds. If he can reach cover, he might break the Americans' pursuit. He steadies his breathing, grips the throttle, and urges the engine for one last surge. But the Corsair behind him, Delaney's wingman, Lieutenant Mark Rocco Ferris, is still climbing, still closing. Rocco lines up the Zero in his gun sight. The Japanese fighter dances lightly through the air, its movements graceful, instinctive. But grace isn't enough anymore. Not against speed, not against firepower, not against an enemy who controls the vertical. Rocco presses the trigger. His tracers erupt upward, stitching across the Zero's elevators. Holes appear along the tail, the lightweight structure tearing apart under the barrage. Ishii feels the aircraft shudder violently. He loses altitude, fast. Smoke spills from the Zero's engine cowl. The controls go mushy. The sky tilts. And for the first time in his combat career, Captain Yasuo Ishii cannot save his aircraft. With a final desperate pull, he levels out just enough to avoid slamming into the water. His Zero skims the waves, then plows into the surf in a violent burst of spray. Behind him, the Corsair formation levels into a loose fighting line. Delaney banks left, scanning for new threats. "That's 3 down," he says quietly into his mask. "Any more up here?" Rocco checks high altitude, then low. "Negative. Think we scared the rest off." But Delaney doesn't relax. No Marine Corsair pilot in 1943 has the luxury of feeling safe. Not in the Solomons. Not with the Japanese still holding airfields scattered across the island chains. New Zeros can appear any moment, rising out of the haze with sun-backed silhouettes and cannon fire glinting in their wings. He rechecks his throttle quadrant, flexes his fingers, and keeps climbing. Above them, the scattered remnants of the 204th Air Group struggle to regroup, climbing toward the distant outline of Kolombangara. The voices on their radio are hushed, filled with disbelief. How did the Americans build something like that? It climbs like a bird, but it dives like a stone. And the guns? So many guns. One pilot, Ensign Tatsuo Minobe, speaks with a tremor he can't hide. If those new fighters spread across the islands, we won't be able to fight them. No one answers, because each of them knows he's telling the truth. The Japanese air strategy in the Solomons had relied on the Zero's dominance. Its unparalleled ability to outturn and outclimb anything the Americans had fielded so far. The Zero's agility had been its shield, its lifeline, the cornerstone of Japanese aerial doctrine. But today, in the space of 20 minutes, that doctrine has been shattered. High above the surf, the three Corsairs form back into a single, elegant V. Their wings gleam in the afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the churning sea. Far behind them, a trail of black smoke marks the graves of aircraft once feared throughout the Pacific. Delaney glances down at the wreckage far below, then up at the cloud banks where the Zeros have fled. "Command's gonna want a full report," he says. "They're not gonna believe what this thing can do." Rocco laughs, breathless from adrenaline. "Yeah, maybe now they'll stop calling it the bent-winged turkey." Delaney smirks. He doesn't argue. No one who saw what the Corsair did today could ever call it that again. Above the Solomons, the air grows strangely quiet. No more gunfire, no more engine roars, just the steady hum of three Corsairs cruising back toward their carriers. But beneath that calm, something monumental has shifted. The Japanese pilots mocked the Corsair when they first saw it. They mocked its size, its weight, its silhouette. They are not laughing anymore. From this day forward, the F4U Corsair will become the terror of the Pacific skies. And for the Zero pilots, the realization is now unavoidable. The era of easy dominance is over. The three Corsairs cut across the sky like dark arrows returning from a battlefield that only they fully understood. Their engines drone in a steady, victorious rumble, but none of the pilots feels triumphant. Not yet. What happened today wasn't a skirmish. It was a revelation. A shift in the air war that no one had predicted would come so suddenly as they climbed toward their rendezvous point. Delaney glances at his fuel gauge. Still adequate. Ammunition? Down to a few belts. Enough to fight, enough to survive. Far ahead, the silhouettes of the bombers they were escorting inch along, unharmed. Their survival alone makes the Corsair's arrival worth every drop of fuel burned and every risk taken. Rocco's voice crackles over the radio. "Hawk, you copy? Someone from the Wildcats wants to know what kind of devil we woke up today." Delaney smirks beneath his oxygen mask. "Tell him the new kid finally showed up for school." But as he scans the horizon, his expression hardens. The Solomons are never quiet for long. Not in 1943. And not with Japanese airfields scattered across the islands like teeth. Every cloud could hide an enemy. Every glimmer of sunlight could be the reflection of another rising Zero. He keeps climbing. Far behind them, higher than they expect, a single Zero clings to altitude, damaged, trailing smoke, but still flying. Inside it, Ensign Tatsuo Minobe grips his controls with white knuckles. He has watched the devastation unfold from above, helpless to intervene. Now he drifts alone through the sky, staring at the spot where Ishii's fighter plunged beneath the waves. He had looked up to Captain Ishii. The man had been a mentor, a quiet anchor in the chaos of Pacific combat. Seeing him fall, Seeing the Zero's once unquestioned superiority shattered feels like losing a piece of the war he had believed in. Minobi steadies his breathing. That aircraft, he whispers to himself. That blue-winged monster. If more of them come, we cannot win the Solomons. For the first time, fear twists deep in his chest. A fear stronger than any he'd felt even when facing overwhelming enemy numbers. This fear comes from something deeper. The understanding that Japan's technological edge has slipped, and that it might never return. He banks slowly, heading toward Kolombangara, engine sputtering. Below him, the sea glitters. Smoke trails drift across the air like the fading strings of a broken harp. Meanwhile, the Corsairs descend toward the U.S. task force spread across the distant ocean. The carriers sit like floating fortresses, flat, dark, and ready. Deck crews stare upward as the three fighters approach, surprised by how early they're returning. Delaney begins his landing sequence. The Corsair, for all its newfound glory, is infamous aboard carriers. The long nose hides the deck. The bounce on touchdown can snap landing gear. The hook sometimes misses the wire. But today, the aircraft feels alive beneath him, cooperative, almost eager. He lowers the flaps, lines up with the deck, and brings the fighter down. The hook catches the second wire. The aircraft screeches to a halt. As the engine winds down, deck crews swarm it, eyes wide. "Lieutenant, what happened up there?" Delaney pulls off his helmet, sweat-soaked and exhausted. He steps down onto the deck, feeling the faint tremble of the carrier beneath his boots. Before he can speak, Rocco lands next, followed by the third Corsair. Officers rush forward. Word spreads fast on a carrier, and the whispers rise like sparks on the wind. Corsairs shredded a Zero patrol. 3 down in the first engagement. Climbed like a rocket. Dove faster than anything in the Pacific. Someone mutters under his breath. Maybe we finally got something that scares them. Delaney doesn't boast. He simply nods once, confirming what everyone already suspects. "It's the real deal," he says. "Those Zeros didn't know what hit them." Across the deck, mechanics run their hands along the Corsair's wings, the bullet holes, the heat scoring, the smell of cordite still clinging to the metal. The aircraft looks battered but unbowed, brutalized but invincible. Just behind them, an intelligence officer arrives, notebook in hand. "Lieutenant Delaney," he begins, "Command wants a full debrief, threat assessment, comparative performance, everything." Delaney wipes the sweat from his forehead. "Tell him one thing first," he says. "The Zero isn't the top dog anymore." In his voice, there's no bravado, no arrogance, just the weight of truth delivered by someone who has seen the tide turn with his own eyes. High above, the tropical sun dips toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the flight deck. As darkness approaches, the Solomons prepare for another night of conflict, another day of uncertainty. But for the first time, American pilots hold something powerful, something that gives them a new kind of confidence. A fighter that climbs faster, dives harder, hits like a thunderbolt, and survives the fight. The Japanese mocked the Corsair. Today, they fled from it. Tomorrow, they will fear it. Night settles over the Solomons in a thick, humid blanket. The deep blue fades to a dim violet, then to black, leaving only the glow of signal lamps and the faint silhouettes of warships cutting through the dark ocean. Aboard the carrier, the smell of fuel and salt mingles with the metallic tang of recently fired guns. The flight deck quiets as maintenance crews finish their initial inspections and wheel the Corsairs toward the hangar bay. Inside the dimly lit ready room, Delaney sits before a long wooden table littered with maps, pencils, and half-empty mugs of cold coffee. His flight jacket is unzipped, his hair still damp from sweat. Across from him, the intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Briggs, flips through a stack of papers, waiting for the final members of the debrief team to arrive. Rocco slumps into the chair beside Delaney, groaning as he stretches his shoulders. "Never thought diving on a Zero would be something I'd enjoy," he mumbles. "Almost felt bad for the poor bastards." Delaney doesn't smile. He remembers Ishii's last dive, the plume of water, the sudden stillness afterward. There's no joy in that. Only the grim reality of a war that's shifting, tightening, accelerating. Briggs clears his throat. "Gentlemen, let's begin." He uncaps his pen. "Lieutenant Delaney, describe the enemy's initial reaction to your approach." Delaney leans forward, elbows on the table. "They underestimated us. Completely. First time they saw the Corsair, they thought it was too big to fight." Rocco snorts. "Didn't stay cocky for long." Briggs jots notes rapidly. "And performance comparison?" Delaney takes a slow breath, picturing the engagement. "We outclimbed them, outdove them. They tried every trick. They couldn't shake us." The room falls silent for a moment. Briggs circles something on his clipboard. "Command suspected this fighter would change things, but we needed proof. You just handed it to us." Delaney nods, but he doesn't celebrate. There's something heavier on his mind. "Sir, they're going to adapt." Everyone looks at him. "The Japanese aren't stupid. Today shocked them, but they'll adjust their tactics. And they still have numbers. They still own most airfields in the Northern Solomons." Briggs closes his notebook. "We're preparing for that. But this engagement proved something critical. The Corsair gives us the vertical. That's new? That's ours. While the Americans analyze diagrams and fuel consumption data deep into the night, the Japanese are conducting their own reckoning hundreds of miles away. Across the dark waters, at the battered airfield on Kolombangara, lanterns flicker inside a small operations hut. 3 surviving Zero pilots sit beneath the dim light, silent, their flight suits still reeking of burned rubber and scorched metal. Ensign Minobe stands alone near the entrance, staring at his smoke-stained gloves. His commander, a stern officer with a weary face, studies him for a long moment. "Ensign," the officer says quietly, "tell us exactly what happened." Minobe hesitates. His voice cracks when he speaks. "Sir, those new American fighters, they move differently than anything we've faced." The officer frowns. "Different how?" Minobe looks up, eyes hollow. "They climb like they're weightless. They dive like they're too heavy to stop. They never lose speed." Another pilot, his arm bandaged from shrapnel, mutters, "Their guns fire like machine cannons. 6 of them. A single burst tore Okada's plane apart." The commander listens, absorbing each word. At last he speaks. "Intelligence told us the Americans had a new carrier fighter. We assumed it was slow, unrefined." Minobe shakes his head violently. "We were wrong." The lantern flickers between them, casting long shadows along the wall. "If they bring more of these into the Solomons," Minobe whispers, "our air groups will be forced into defense. We cannot meet them climb for climb. We cannot meet them dive for dive. We cannot match their firepower." The commander closes his eyes. "Then we must rely on the old strength, the turn." Minobe hesitates again. "Sir, even that wasn't enough." A long, painful silence fills the hut, because the truth is undeniable. The Zero's era of superiority The era that carried Japan through the early years of the war has begun to fracture. Not because the Japanese pilots grew weaker, not because their training faltered, but because the Americans finally fielded something faster, something tougher, something deadly, something born not from elegance, but from overwhelming power. The F4U Corsair, and though only a handful have seen it so far, the shockwave from today's battle is already rippling outward. Across American decks, across Japanese airfields, across the islands still contested, across the entire Pacific. Tomorrow, both sides will wake knowing that everything has changed. The air war is entering a new phase, and the blue-winged fighter with the bent wings is leading it. By early 1944, the F4U Corsair had grown into something far beyond the aircraft Japanese pilots once mocked. It wasn't the clumsy, hard-to-land brute they remembered from rumor or early intelligence reports. It had matured, refined, honed into an apex predator built for the late-war Pacific skies. And its enemy, the Mitsubishi Zero, had not. Japan's aviation industry was straining under blockade. Fuel shortages limited flying hours. Engine upgrades were designed but never mass-produced. Materials grew scarce. Veteran pilots were irreplaceable and their losses increasingly catastrophic. The Zero that faced the Corsair in 1944 was the same aircraft designed in 1939. Astonishing in its time, but now hopelessly outclassed. The Corsair, meanwhile, kept evolving. Fleet squadrons received improved F4U 1D models with rocket pylons and better high-altitude performance. Pilots gained thousands of hours of collective combat experience. Tactics sharpened. Coordination between Navy, Marine, and Army Air Force units improved. The skies over the Pacific shifted from uncertain duels to one-sided hunts. A veteran Japanese pilot later remarked, "By 1944, meeting a Corsair meant death. The pilot saw us before we saw him." It was true. Thanks to superior radar coverage, American pilots were often vectored onto enemy formations long before visual contact. The Zero, once a fearsome symbol of Japan's dominance, now often died confused and unaware. As U.S. forces advanced toward the Marianas, the Philippines, and eventually Okinawa, the Corsair became a central pillar of island-hopping air superiority. Its speed, its firepower, its ruggedness, its relentless presence over every landing zone and fleet anchorage. The aircraft Japanese pilots had once called ugly and too heavy was now the bird they most dreaded to see. And the numbers told the story with brutal clarity. Corsair pilots finished the war with an astonishing 11-1 kill ratio against all Japanese aircraft. Against Zeros, specifically, the margin was even higher. This wasn't luck. This wasn't overconfidence. This was a technological, industrial, and tactical mismatch of the kind that only emerges late in a total war. Japan's fighter force, once the terror of the Pacific, was being crushed by a machine they had dismissed as a joke. When the war ended in 1945, the F4U Corsair stood tall among the greatest naval fighters ever built. Its long nose and inverted gull wings became icons of the Pacific Air War. But more importantly, it left behind lessons that shaped post-war aviation doctrine. Lesson 1. Never underestimate an aircraft based on looks or rumors. The Japanese pilot's fatal miscalculation wasn't malice. It was complacency. They evaluated the Corsair by shape and hearsay, not performance data. In war, such assumptions are deadly. Lesson 2. Industrial power wins air wars. The Zero was a masterpiece of early war design. But Japan could not mass-produce improved engines, armor plating, or new airframes at the speed America could refine the Corsair. Technology without production is meaningless. Lesson 3. Ruggedness matters as much as speed. Many Corsairs limped back home with shredded wings, cylinders shot out, or control cables barely hanging on. Zeros, with their paper-thin skins and lack of armor, rarely survived comparable damage. Lesson 4. Pilot training is as important as the aircraft itself. By 1944, Japanese pilots often had less than 100 hours of flight time. American Corsair pilots frequently had 10 times that long before ever reaching combat. In the end, the F4U Corsair became more than a fighter. It became a symbol of America's ability to adapt, innovate, mass-produce, and overwhelm. Qualities that defined the Allied victory across the Pacific. As for the Zero, it remains respected, even revered, as an engineering marvel of its era. But it was never upgraded enough to keep pace with the war it helped ignite. And so, the Corsair, the bent-wing bird, the whistling death, accomplished something few aircraft ever achieve. It survived its own era. It fought not only in World War II, but in Korea, outlasting most piston-engine fighters. A testament to how far it had come from the days when Japanese pilots laughed at the sight of it. They mocked the Corsair. But when the shooting started, its speed, its climb, and its firepower left their Zeros helpless. In the decades after the war, historians, engineers, and surviving pilots would look back on the F4U Corsair with a mix of awe and disbelief. It was never supposed to be elegant. It was never meant to be beloved. It wasn't even designed to win beauty contests on the deck of a carrier. It was built for one purpose: to seize control of the Pacific skies and never give it back. What began as misunderstood prototype with landing issues grew into the fighter that defined late-war air superiority. It earned its reputation not through myth, but through performance, through the cold, measurable truth of its achievements. The Japanese Zero, once unmatched, had symbolized the early war nightmare America never expected. The Corsair symbolized the answer. Every bent wing, every roaring radial cylinder, every tracer round fired from its .650 caliber guns told the story of a nation that had learned, adapted, and refused to be outpaced again. From the Solomons to the Marshall Islands, from the Marianas to Okinawa, the Corsair's shadow stretched across nearly every major campaign. It supported Marines on black sand beaches, shielded fleets from kamikazes, swept enemy aircraft from the sky, and forged legends from the men who flew it. Many of those men would later say the same thing: the Corsair never quit on you. And in a war defined by extremes, extreme distances, extreme losses, extreme industrial effort, that reliability meant survival. When peace finally returned to the Pacific, the Corsair didn't fade into history like so many wartime machines. It continued flying. It fought again in Korea. It became the last great piston-engine warrior in a world transitioning to jets. Today, restored Corsairs still thunder across air shows, their engines echoing a sound once feared by countless pilots who never lived to tell their stories. And somewhere in that roar is the memory of the moment Japan's fighter aces, so confident in their Zero, so certain the enemy would never catch up, realized they were wrong. The whistling death had come for them, and the skies of the Pacific would never be the same again.